We aren't far removed from the prime days of the running back position. Just 11 years ago, a running back won the MVP award, Adrian Peterson. 3 others also won the award in the 21st century. Now, that seems crazy. Christian McCaffrey put up the 3rd most scrimmage yards of all time in 2019 and didn't even receive a single vote. It didn't help that he was playing for the Carolina Panthers, who finished with only 5 wins, which points us to one of the main reasons why running backs just don't matter anymore. If you have a good running back, it doesn't do a whole lot compared to other positions when it comes to the team's success. Back in 2000, running backs were getting paid up with all the other positions. While the NFL rapidly grew throughout the 2000s and players started making more and more, running backs weren't following the same pattern. They were getting less and less important to offenses, and a lot of things just went wrong when it comes to the recent history with running back contracts. As the NFL became more of a passing league and analytics were being worked into teams' front offices, running backs began to suffer. The numbers suggested that an offensive line was more important for a running game than a star running back. Contracts for running backs were stagnant throughout the 2000s, while contracts for other positions like quarterback and offensive line skyrocketed. This would eventually culminate in Le'Veon Bell holding out the entire 2018 season because of contract concerns. The Steelers wanted to give Bell the franchise tag, which is a 1-year fully guaranteed deal at a value based on the position the player is playing at. The number must be the average of the top 5 earners at that position or 120% of that player's previous salary, whichever is greater. If the player rejects this offer, they are unable to negotiate with other NFL teams for that entire season. So, basically, they either accept it or just don't play. Now, in design, this is a good thing for teams and players. The team gets to keep the good player, and the player gets a guaranteed 1-year deal that should be a high dollar amount. But Bell is a running back, and the value for the franchise tag on a running back is pretty low considering how much running backs are being paid these days. Bell also wanted a multi-year deal, which is not surprising because if he gets injured playing on the franchise tag, then he's not going to get another big payday most likely. The Steelers knew that, and they knew that running back is the most injury-prone position in the league, so if they sign Bell to a big multi-year deal and he gets injured, then the contract will be a bust. Not only that, but running backs notoriously fall off faster than any other position in the game, so teams are not interested in giving them 3, 4, 5-year deals like other positions get. NFL teams know the risk-reward, and it's just not worth it. Now, this wasn't the first holdout in NFL history, but it is probably the most well-known. Bell not only sat out the whole season, but was arguably the best running back in the league at the time. While he sat out, James Conner had a Pro Bowl season with over 1,400 yards from scrimmage in just 13 games. This holdout accomplished exactly the opposite of what Bell hoped it would. His numbers would fall off a cliff after signing with the Jets in 2019, and he showed how replaceable running backs were when the day 2 pick James Conner went out and put up great numbers behind a great offensive line in his second year. Running back's value was always on the decline since 2000, but this was the start of the fall that we are seeing today. That same year in 2018, Saquon Barkley made his NFL debut after being selected with the 2nd overall pick by the New York Giants. In 2017, Leonard Fournette was drafted with the 4th overall pick. In 2016, Ezekiel Elliott was selected by the Dallas Cowboys with the 4th overall pick, and in 2015, Todd Gurley was picked with the 10th selection in the draft by the Rams, who were still in St. Louis at the time. Now, these guys were top-of-the-line running backs coming out of college, so good that NFL teams were willing to use one of their biggest assets they have, their first-round pick, on them. So let's just do a little quick recap on how their careers went. Todd Gurley was the first of the bunch, and he got off to a blazing start in his NFL career, winning the Offensive Rookie of the Year and being named to the All-Pro second team in his first year. He took a huge step back in his sophomore season just to explode the next year. He put up over 2,000 yards from scrimmage, including over 1,300 on the ground and over 700 through the air. He also scored 19 touchdowns total. He was so good, he finished second in MVP voting behind Tom Brady. He made first-team All-Pro and was easily the best at his position in the league. The next year, he scored 21 touchdowns and recorded 1,800 yards from scrimmage. Man, this guy's going to be the best running back for years to come, right? He's only 24 years old. He's going to break records. He's easily going to make the Hall of Fame, right? Right? Okay, well, we all know what happens to Todd Gurley next. On July 25th, 2018, the Rams signed Gurley to a 4-year, $60 million extension that included $45 million guaranteed. The next season in 2019, Gurley averaged under 4 yards per attempt and recorded just 1,064 yards from scrimmage, which is okay, but coming off those past 2 seasons is a huge disappointment. After this season, Gurley was released by the Rams and then played a single season for the Falcons, but he put up bad numbers. The Rams would then win the Super Bowl in 2021 with Sony Michel being their lead back, who they acquired from the Patriots for a 6th and 4th round pick. Gurley's downfall was the result of various knee injuries, which eventually led to his retirement at the age of 26. That contract the Rams gave him now looks very bad. Zeke exploded onto the scene in 2018 with fellow rookie Dak Prescott leading the Cowboys to the playoffs after the team put up just 4 wins the year before. He put up nearly 2,000 yards from scrimmage and scored 16 touchdowns. He was second in Rookie of the Year behind Dak. The next 3 years they were pretty good for Zeke as he would continue to be efficient and stay relatively healthy. 2020 was a down year for Elliott though, as he played in 15 games but didn't even eclipse the 1,000-yard mark. He averaged just 4 yards per rush and 4.4 yards per touch. The once explosive Elliott wasn't quite looking the same anymore, and he was only 25 years old. The Cowboys still signed Zeke to a 6-year, $90 million contract with $50 million guaranteed. Elliott did not get much more efficient in 2021, and in 2022, he just looked slow and was relegated to goal line and pass pro almost exclusively. The contract was already a disaster just 2 years in. The numbers were bad, and the Cowboys had Tony Pollard, a 2019 4th-round pick, putting up insane efficiency numbers as he was averaging over 5 yards per attempt behind Zeke. He really should have been the number 1 guy all of 2021 and 2022, but since the Cowboys gave all that money to Elliott, they were pressured to keep him on the field. Elliott was cut and now signed a $6 million deal with the Patriots for 2023. The Cowboys are trotting out Pollard with a lot more confidence. The running back contract strikes again. 1 year later, the 4th overall pick was another running back. This time, it was the LSU product Leonard Fournette. Most analysts and experts agreed that this pick probably wasn't the best option, but Fournette did have a lot of talent. It wouldn't take long, though, to see why this pick was awful. After 3 seasons of pedestrian numbers, Fournette was released by the Jags. He was labeled a bust, and you might be saying, well, all positions have busts in the draft, not just running backs. They could have drafted a quarterback or a tackle, and he could have been just as bad. But the story doesn't end there. James Robinson would take over for Fournette in 2020, and he performed better than Fournette did in his entire career. James Robinson was not the 4th overall pick. He was actually undrafted. He was not drafted, and he was signed on a minimum contract with very, very little risk. When you replace a 4th overall pick with an undrafted rookie just 3 years after the 4th overall pick was drafted, and the undrafted player plays better, that's not a good thing. Obviously, it's rare that you see this in any other position. Quarterback, wide receiver, offensive line, anywhere on defense, it's very rare to see undrafted players make such an impact so quickly. Jaylen Warren, Austin Eckler, and Phillip Lindsay are some other recent undrafted players at the position that gave their team great production. Running backs have the best list of undrafted players by far, and that is a big reason why teams won't use top picks on them, since they can get them later or even after the draft and be just as productive. Now the final running back on the list, Saquon Barkley. The number 2 overall pick in the 2018 draft, and he was hyped up to be one of the most talented players coming out of college football in history. It's safe to say that he lived up to the hype. A torn ACL would knock him out of the 2020 season, and in 2021, he was looking rough. 2022, though, he bounced back and looked good again, and the Giants even made the playoffs. He was a huge reason why they made the playoffs, and is one of the few times here that we've seen investing in a running back work well. Of course, in 2023, he was the subject of one of the higher profile holdouts and eventually came to terms with a 1-year, $10 million deal. This contract is a complete result of the Ezekiel Elliott contract and others like it, where teams just aren't giving long-term deals to running backs, especially ones with the injury history like Barkley. Even without the injuries, they just fall off a cliff out of nowhere after a few years. Todd Gurley and Elliott were on top of the world in terms of running backs for a couple of years, then next thing you know, one of them is out of the league and the other is a backup. And you can't be paying backups $60 million contracts if you want to get a roster that is fit for winning a Super Bowl. Speaking of a roster that is fit for winning a Super Bowl, let's take a look back on some of the rosters from teams who won the big game. In 2022, the Kansas City Chiefs had Isaiah Pacheco, a 7th-round pick, as their leading rusher, who, by the way, was outplaying the 1st-round pick in Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who was his backup. In 2021, the Rams had Sony Michel, who we mentioned before. The Buccaneers in 2020 had Leonard Fournette, who they got after he was cut from the Jaguars, and Ronald Jones II, who was a 2nd-round pick on his rookie contract. In 2019, the Chiefs won it with nobody eclipsing 500 rushing yards on the team. The most went to Damian Williams, who was undrafted and not on a big contract. And here's the rest of the 10 most recent Super Bowl winning running backs. Other than Marshawn Lynch, these guys are 1. Not being used all that often, and 2. Not being paid a lot of money. Obviously, this information is public to all the front offices in the league, who are all looking to do what these teams did, win the Super Bowl. And how do they do it? Well, most teams are going to look at these rosters and say, well, We want to win the Super Bowl, and they did it like this, so we should probably look at what they're doing. These teams aren't running the ball for the most part, they aren't paying running backs, and they aren't spending high draft picks on them. Of course, there was a lot of drama in the offseason regarding the running back contracts. They play the most grueling position in the league where your chances of getting injured are higher than anywhere else, and they don't get compensated for it. But on the other side of things, front offices don't want to invest in them because that investment usually doesn't work out, and the numbers that we've gone over show that. At the end of the day, it comes down to supply and demand. The supply for running backs is higher than any other position. We've seen running backs be productive from the first overall pick all the way to the 7th round and even undrafted. The supply is larger than any other position. The demand, on the other hand, is pretty low. In the preseason this year, 7% of plays had 2 running backs in them, so around 90% of the time, there's only 1 running back on the field. And as the NFL becomes more pass-heavy, that running back gets used less and less often. And it's simple economics from there. High supply, low demand means the price is going to be pretty low. Quarterbacks have only 1 player on the field, and they get paid huge contracts. That is because you don't find a Tom Brady in the 6th round every other draft. A lot of the NFL's starting quarterbacks right now are former first-round picks, and we see quarterbacks bust all the time, making the supply really low. The drop from Patrick Mahomes to the 10th best quarterback is a lot bigger than the drop from guys like Nick Chubb and CMC to the 10th best running back. In the 2023 draft, we saw 2 running backs go inside the top 12, a rare sight to see in 2023. Bijan Robinson is not surprising, as a lot of scouts have his talent up there with that of Saquon Barkley when he came out of Penn State. And as we saw before, Saquon was the best out of those 4 highly drafted running backs and was the main piece on an offense that went to the playoffs and won a game. Jahmyr Gibbs at 12 was the more shocking selection, as he's not a generational talent at the position like Bijan, but he's still great. The Lions, though, had other needs that they needed to address over the running back position, and it doesn't help that he was used at a 27% snap rate in Week 1. If you spend the 12th pick on a running back, you have to use him. We'll see how these picks go in the future, and it could be the last time we see a running back drafted in the top 10 for a long time. Running backs getting big second contracts after their rookie contract is up is going to be a rare sight in the future. We've saw what these 4 highly drafted running backs did. Once they're on their second contract, they almost always fall off and the contract doesn't work out in the end. While running backs continue to try to form a union-like force through Zoom meetings to get better contracts, the numbers and history are stacked against them. It will be a tough task for them to get front offices to pay up, as they have plenty of evidence to back up their decision to not pay them. Is anyone going to want to play running back anymore? Because the future at the position for the players is just not looking good.